category is What the Trans, Darling?
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to What the Trans.
What the Trans? Yes, it's us. We're back. How have you been, Alex?
Oh, well, it's been a lovely week, you know. The new Doctor Who's come out, and I've been spending all my evenings, instead of writing the script, just watching Doctor Who.
So is it, there are now a couple of episodes out, is there, or is it?
Yes, indeed. There's like a whole bunch of Doctor Who episodes from the classic era, basically all of them coming to the BBC iPlayer, and a whole bunch of other content in the run-up to the Doctor Who 60th, and it is crazy.
Yeah, obviously I've been keeping a broad eye on it, but I consider you to be our Whovian correspondent, so I realise I haven't needed to pay too much attention. Obviously, I'm aware that the Doctor's companion is played by Yasmin Finney, who is a trans woman.
Yeah, it was Yasmin Finney. Oh, that's going to be such a hype thing with Donna Noble, isn't it?
So Donna's coming back, is she? Because I thought that was, well, I don't know. The whole thing about Doctor Who is the rule book is quite frequently thrown away. So to say, oh, well, surely that's against the rules, but of course it isn't. Why would it be? There must be a way, clearly, if Donna Noble is making a return. So I did hear about that, but I wasn't sure if it was a shitpost or not. So it's good that that's actually legit.
Oh, indeed, you didn't see the trailer on it, or that?
I did not, no.
But to be fair, whenever I sometimes I think watching the trailer is too much of a spoiler, and yet I decided to watch it, so I've shot myself in the foot. There's no turning back.
No, I'll check it out at some point. But yes,
yeah, back into you. Yeah, how are you this week?
I'm all right. We had a little bit of a Samhain soiree on Saturday. Ooh. You know, so it was a costume party, and myself and the two girlfriends dressed up as the main three characters from Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. So I was the yellow guy. And I made a duck mask for Lexi, and Nadia spent a long time attaching wool, like red wool, and two ping pong balls to this kind of bowl that she found, I guess. So yeah, it was entirely a handcrafted costume, and there was loads of bits of wool. We kept finding them on the floor all night. But yes, we had a good few people around. It was very nice, and it was a party of grown-ups, and you could tell because everybody had said, right, I'm tired and I'm leaving by like 1 o'clock. We didn't have to kick anybody out. It was all just perfectly civilized.
Yeah.
And probably quite middle class now I think about it.
Yeah, middle class with fur turning into the new glitter, essentially, on that one. Oh, I remember the Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared things, as well as a 13, 14-year-old. I don't remember it keeping me up at night, but I'm sure many people my age were just, like, oh, I don't know what to look at this for.
What is this? Yeah, well, so there was the new series, wasn't there? A few months ago. I say a few months ago. It was legit last year, actually, because I watched it not long after I first met you, after I got home from London, having watched The Prince.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's this channel for the 6 full sort of 25-minute episodes on Channel 4's streaming service, all 4.
Channel 4?
Yes.
They went to proper TV.
Yeah, and it's amazing. It really is. So if you've not watched the Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared that's on YouTube, check that one out. And if you've got all 4, check out the main episodes as well, because it's this wonderful blend of surrealism, artistry, and existential horror. It's wonderful.
Oh, that's brilliant. I always hear about the YouTube creators going into the big TV space, then failing miserably. So it's fascinating to see that they all went well.
Yeah.
Though, to be fair, Channel 4 is known for like the stuff like, what was the puppets things with the news? The
Spitting Image?
Spitting Image, that was it. Because they must have... So they've probably got some good teams.
Wave a chicken in the air, shove a deck chair up your nose. Yeah, I can't remember. Was that Channel 4? Anyway, it doesn't matter. We're getting slightly off topic and we've not even really started the episode. Because as you, dear listener, are probably aware, we're here to talk about... What is it now? What is it? Oh, not the news.
I want to talk about Doctor Who.
Yeah, sorry. Well, we will. We'll have a whole we'll have a whole episode of Who are the
Who
Trans.
are the trans? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, the news.
And so we start off talking about conversion therapy. Despite countless U-turns, doubling back and going in every direction except forwards, we are still completely in the dark as to whether the government will go ahead with any sort of conversion therapy ban. Perhaps a ban that is so possibly full of loopholes it might as well be Swiss cheese. Now, the start of the story is back in January earlier this year, where they said they would announce a bill to ban conversion therapy to, excitement and, thank the gods from many in the LGBT community. Yeah, they're actually doing it. Then in June, it was reported that it was in the Prime Minister's Red Box. However, 9 months later, on the 14th of September, Stonewall staged a protest outside on Parliament Square, saying that the government had broken its promise, as they refused to confirm if the ban will make it onto the King's Speech this year. Now, 10 days after that, The Times reported that the ban had been dropped, but then on the 18th of October, it was reported that the government was going to push ahead with a ban. But then the next day, government ministers were reported to have been saying that it wasn't true, including some MPs blaming the plans to ban conversion therapy as a reason for the loss of a by-election. And it's looking less likely as the last-minute intervention of Miriam Cates was stepping in, calling for the government to scrap the conversion therapy ban altogether, stating that it would anchor our base, split the party, and effectively put a Stonewall Charter into law. It's like, that's great, can we have that in writing, please? To add another layer of nonsense to it, Equalities Minister Stuart Andrews won't commit to it either way, saying, "I do apologise that it has taken this long, but it is a very complex issue. It is right that we take the time to carefully consider." Now, when we asked our audience on Threads, the response was basically that there was not a chance. Out of 75 respondents to the poll, 85% of them think that the government won't be banning conversion therapy, so don't think we're optimistic about it at all. So, fun times with all of this flip-flopping and saying, oh, we're going to do it, and then saying, no, we're not going to do it, literally the next day.
It was crazy. It took me about 10 minutes to write down the timeline of doubling back, going back and forth and cross-referencing. There was so much doubling back, and our audience basically doesn't trust a single thing the government would do with this ban. And if it was even there, it was going to be a pile of shit.
Yeah. Loopholes galore.
How long has this been in the works for now?
Stonewall, when they started their protest about it, which is a few months ago now, pointed out that it had been over 1,000 days since the government said that they would ban conversion therapy. So that's 3 years, isn't it?
Maybe even 5, I think, 'cause it was 2018, wasn't it, when it was announced? God, I remember... Well, I was about to say, God, I remember when I was just finished school and they announced it, and then I realised, oh wait, there's probably a better comparison to, God, how long has it been?
That one works well for you personally, but yes, it has been a long time, hasn't it? A frankly ridiculous amount of time to put through what should ostensibly be quite a simple bill. There's these things that are classified as conversion therapy, ban them. Those things are not allowed. No exemptions, no loopholes for religious counselling or whatever euphemism they choose. None of that, just one and done, banned. But they won't do that, because I think Miriam Cates, in a sense, has the right of it in terms of their logic, because there are going to be people who vote Conservative who want conversion therapy to still be allowed because they are convinced that it works. Or they've convinced themselves that it works, even if they kind of know deep down that it doesn't. They just think, well, politically I have to believe this, so I'm going to go ahead and believe it.
Yeah, although I think in the last pod we also said that even with that, that's like a very small... I think people said it was a very small minority of average voters even cared about it at all.
Yeah, there's people who've got other things to worry about, haven't they? Particularly people who aren't in the LGBT community. As we've mentioned many times on the podcast, there's the cost of living crisis, there's a climate crisis, there's a lot of crises, and not everybody in the country really knows that much about a conversion therapy ban, but the community that does care about it is very, very engaged and has been pushing back and needling at the government saying, where's the ban, where's the ban, where's the ban? And they're still not doing it.
Oh, exactly. And I think we've seen, with some consideration, there's even... Because I went to the LGB Alliance protest the other day, and there's been a recent talks of LGB Alliance trying to weasel in that gender-affirming care is a form of conversion therapy.
That's that's something that they absolutely have perhaps had in the works or planned to do for quite some time. I really hate to keep saying this, but we have talked about that exact thing on the podcast before. Back in the days when Michelle was with us, the pair of us both expressed our fear that groups like the LGBT Alliance and Fair Play for Women and, the anti-trans hate groups, basically, because that is what they are.
Yeah, pretty much.
Would go ahead and try and reframe gender affirmative care as conversion therapy and say, oh, well, no, you can't be giving any kind of hormones or talking therapy for trans people because that's conversion therapy. And, it doesn't surprise me that that's what they're going for, because that's exactly what we've warned you about.
Yeah. I mean, even when it comes to that, it sounds like the fact that they're flip-flopping, going back and forth,
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether they've even lost that as an argument to try and weasel in, quite frankly, we don't even know if it's going to make it on the King's Speech to start with.
Yeah, indeed. And again, it would be so simple, it would be a really quick win. Like David Cameron, for all his faults, and there were many, did kind of railroad through the Equal Marriage Act. And it wouldn't have passed were it not for the votes of Labour and the Lib Dems and I think the SNP as well. Because a lot of the Tories, almost all of them, voted against their own Prime Minister's bill. And I think this is something that would go the same way. It wouldn't pass due to votes of Conservatives, it would pass due to votes from the opposition. And it would be an easy way for the Tories to say, oh, we're not the nasty party anymore, we're the party of progress, we're the party of the new family, and being able to say, look at this nice, straightforward, unambiguously good thing that we've done. And then when anybody tries to criticise them and says, you hate LGBT people, they can point to that and say, no, look, because we did this, didn't we? That was good. That was a good thing. We're off the hook for a bit now. And they can't even do that.
No, exactly. They're when we were looking at the conferences, they were so divided that even just trying to do anything that would be against the grain would literally probably be, trans people causing the government to dissolve in the, what's it called, committee? The
22 committee.
1922 committee. So...
Just, why is it taking them so long? I mean, obviously we know why, but still, you'd think they would just stop shouting at each other for not being right-wing enough and just do something that's kind of unambiguously good that would gain them some quote-unquote brownie points, but they won't even do that. And in a sense, for our purposes, that's good, because if they can't agree on that, then who are they all going to be voting for and voting with, really? If the right is divided, that's brilliant, but, it's supposed to be the left that can't agree among itself, so... Yeah,
I suppose we won't be able to find out till the King's Speech when it's after our pod is out, I suppose, so...
Yeah. Almost certainly, yeah. Well, what'll happen is that, we'll release this episode and then literally the day after there will be something making a mockery of everything that we've just said. But there you go.
That'll be for us to rock up in the next pod and for us to react.
And say, hey, remember that thing we said?
Well, look at that.
Anyway, let us move on, shall we?
So talking of buggering up, Fuck It Up Faulkner is back to it and avoiding all accountability. An investigation into her bullying and inappropriate behaviour has been scrapped. This was following the investigation being leaked due to a special Channel 4 report.
Indeed.
This now brings into question the independence of the EHRC. No, I'm just kidding. Everyone knows it's as crooked as a painting in an earthquake. Hell, in an article from The Guardian, Faulkner described Liz Truss as her boss. So this started back in May during the special report by Channel 4 into Baroness Faulkner. Back in May, it was found to have large claims of a toxic culture inside the EHRC, whilst also claiming there was a wave of resignations in the department, and that there was an external barrister investigating 40 claims of bullying by Faulkner. However, 3 days later, it was found that the EHRC had paused its investigation into Faulkner, claiming it wanted to investigate the leak. This comes to no surprise to us, as earlier last year, in a leak to Vice, some who were in EHRC during the tenure of Faulkner claimed that the EHRC was now an enemy to human rights. However, when Channel 4 released their news report, Kemi Badenoch then commissioned an independent legal expert to review how the complaints were handled, and as a result of the review, the EHRC announced the investigation to Faulkner has closed.
They're going to point to that leak and say, oh, well, we can't do it now. It's that leak has forced us to close down the investigation. And essentially, I suspect they might use that as an argument against a free press by saying, oh, well, Channel 4 did a piece on it, and now the whole thing has been prejudiced. So,
oh no, I shot a person and someone's reported it to the press. We can't investigate this murder now, can we?
There are so many screw jobs by this government where someone makes a mistake or says something off colour or is an absolutely nasty, horrible, toxic bully, and as soon as that information gets out there, the person who blew the whistle is the one who is punished rather than the person who should be, if that makes sense.
Oh, indeed, yeah. It's giving Faulkner a sense of invincibility that no one can touch her. It's giving that sort of, if you were inside the EHRC, it would give that kind of toxic environment an even more toxic place, because you're like, oh, you can't take out the king now, can you?
Just Baroness Faulkner has definitely set herself up as an enemy of the trans community, and it doesn't surprise me that that the EHRC has been described as an enemy of human rights, and that because it's not just trans people that they've subsequently had a go at. They've taken this thing, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and turned it in some classic literal Orwellian newspeak. They've turned it into the opposite of that. I mean, you had something to mention about the DWP and an investigation there, didn't you?
Whenever you're talking about the EHRC, everyone just says this needs to be an independent department. It needs to make sure that it doesn't give a basically, if it's an independent, it means it doesn't give a shit what the government says. It will plough on regardless because it's the right thing to do. But in the case of DWP, what happened was that EHRC was going to investigate the deaths into its claimants of, like, I can't recall it, but it was sort of like there was deaths that the EHRC was investigating, and then they chose to scrap the investigation.
Yeah, because the DWP and their ridiculous policy of sanctioning people and the, really, really high bar that you have to pass to be able to gain any kind of assistance, and the famous stories of people who've been found dead at home after having been declared fit for work, or people who've been sanctioned and then have been unable to buy food or heating. And that does need to be investigated. The DWP is ripe for an investigation of some sort because there's something gone very, very wrong there on a fundamentally moral level. The DWP is not good, to say the least.
No, indeed. It's like there's got to be justice.
Exactly. And so they could have done that investigation, and they could have done it properly and said, well, look, here's where things have started to go really wrong. But then they wouldn't do that because that would reveal that how much of the DWP's action is politically motivated rather than socially motivated, I feel.
Oh, indeed, it would make the government look bad, essentially.
Worse.
And that's basically, it would make the government look like an evil bunch of bastards. Well, to be fair, I already knew that. But it's also, reminds me of the situation with the anti-Semitism case with Labour. They investigated Labour, but then when Labour put in a complaint about the Islamophobia inside of the Conservative Party, they declined to investigate. And that was even before Faulkner's time. And quite frankly, a lot of this independence, it's the way the EHRC works is the Secretary of State or a senior government minister appoints the chairperson, the commissioners, the heads of it all. So if you go against what the government says, they can sack you.
That's the impression you get, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. And also its funding is secured by the government. So if you go against it, they can say, you know what, we're just going to cripple your department and we're not going to give you any funding, or, well, basically enough to cripple you.
Yeah, just, remove $1 million here and a couple of million there, and then suddenly the department doesn't have enough to, fulfill its basic functions. And to say nothing of the decisions that people high up in the DWP are no doubt making of their own accord. And I think the EHRC should be a tremendous force for human rights. It's in the name, but it isn't. It's just how are the mighty fallen, really? Because it used to be such a force for good.
Yeah, they were literally pushing for self-ID. They were literally, but then it was a drastic change from David Isaac, who was doing that during its tenure, to Baroness Faulkner, and it was noted in the Vice article that it was a massive heel change. And quite frankly, the leadership is what if Labour do cut, and I suppose that then comes into what's its future going to be, because when Labour comes in, if Labour comes into power, we need to see what they'll do with it, because that's a problem they'll be confronted with. A Conservative appointed EHRC. What will they do with it? Will they sack the whole leadership? Will there be a massive shake-up? Or will they just let them do their thing? And what direction are they going to take for the EHRC? That, for me, is the big indicator. Nothing about this self-ID, nothing about what they're going to do for conversion therapy. What they do with the EHRC will give you a strong indicator on their stance on how progressive they are for social change.
It's not about packing the courts, it's about packing the boardrooms.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Check me out. Yeah. Occasionally saying something of relevance and interest. We've spoken about it, well, we and others have spoken about it before, how the EHRC should be such a force for good, for holding the government to account, and it's just not now. And so many people have left there, and you can only imagine the calibre of people they're now getting on board to work against human rights. It makes you sick, really.
You've got to feel for those people who have just been bullied and been told that, and to see that their cases just be, disregarded.
They just disappear into the ether. Oh, we've dropped that investigation, and maybe someone spent months or years putting together evidence and building a case to say, well, this thing is a problem and we should do something about it, and then they're just told, nope, it's gone, it's down the memory hole. That's it. It's probably enough of that, I think, because we can repeat ourselves about how terrible the EHRC has become until we are blue in the face.
I could rant about it for hours.
And we have.
Oh, we have.
So for the main chunk of this podcast, we are going to talk about something that I've not had very much experience of for a very long time. Youth. Woo.
No, you're not. You're still young.
No, I am 40 next year. So the struggles of younger trans people of today are completely different to the ones that I grew up with, although it must be said there's definitely a few similarities. Being a young trans person was so terrifying to me that I didn't come out as trans and change my name and all of that stuff until I was 28. Although, admittedly, I would occasionally wear a dress for a good few years before that, but I digress. The struggles of being a young trans person today has complications and levels of threat that I never had to deal with. Social media, cyberbullying, and the current culture war about the very existence of us must make for a horrifying climate to be yourself in, to say nothing of the actual climate crisis, which grows every year, but that's for another time as well. But equally, trans joy and gender euphoria, they're still real too, and it might even be easier to connect community and find friends than it was ever for me and others of my generation or older. I did grow up in the shadow of Section 28, so while I was at school and college, LGBTQ people were just not talked about. The term today might be shadow banned. It just wasn't addressed at all, and because of the chilling effect caused by that particular slice of legislation, it made sure that teachers were never quite sure what they could and couldn't say, so they just avoided the whole topic.
Today, there are people who would like to bring Section 28 or something like it back from the dead. They provide misleading or outright false guidance to teachers and school and press for the most regressive changes. Back in April this year, we saw the release of some leaked guidance from the Conservative government, which suggested that teachers would be instructed to essentially out trans students to their parents, whether those parents are supportive or not. The guidance would also ban trans girls from taking part in competitive and contact school sports as part of a girls' team. There is, of course, resistance to this proposed guidance, and one of the people leading the charge is Dee, who you may already be familiar with thanks to their work on Instagram. A few days ago, we sat down with Dee for a chat about their campaign, Trans Kids Deserve to Grow Up.
So, Dee, thanks very much for sitting down with us.
Thank you for inviting me to have this chat.
Well, we wanted to get somebody who knows, someone knowledgeable about it and who can really get across why this is important. So, just get straight into it then. Could you tell us a little bit about your campaign?
Yes, so Trans Kids Deserve to Grow Up is a UK-based trans solidarity campaign, and it was created in response to the leaked alleged transgender student guidance that came out earlier this summer. And I remember this leak happening, and I was just appalled by what was included in this leak. As a trans individual, as a non-binary individual, as an ex-teacher who has worked closely with trans students, what was being proposed in this guidance was so disgusting that I just couldn't sit there and not do anything about it. And one of the things that I really took away from the leaked guidance, which I will go into and do a little bit of a summary, but one of the things that I took away from it, and the reason I created the hashtag trans kids deserve to grow up, is that if this guidance was to become reality, our trans kids wouldn't become trans adults. And as a trans adult who has been sometimes the only trans adult that a young trans kid has seen and realized, wow, trans people and trans young people can grow up, I just couldn't sit quietly. And using my last year of working in journalism, my last 2 years of creating content and educating, I created this campaign and have been working towards raising awareness about the campaign, debunking some of the myths that are being projected onto our young trans youth. And as we are still waiting for the official guidance to be released, I am working with organisations and charities to prepare teachers and young people on how to react if this guidance unfortunately becomes a reality, which, considering everything that was said at the Tory conference, it might become a reality. And that is something that is just disgusting, and something that we just can't brush under the carpet as, oh, they're just being anti-trans. Like, this guidance, if it becomes reality, will lead to our kids not making it into adulthood. And that's why I chose a hashtag that's quite in your face, quite, it doesn't, tiptoe around. And I wanted it to be in your face, because when we talk about trans kids, unfortunately, a lot of the time we do neglect the conversation around their existence. We do kind of say, oh, they're just kids, but that's not the case. We need to be giving trans kids a voice, and being so abrupt with this hashtag and campaign was something that I was really passionate about. And yeah, I've been doing that for a few months now, since the leak.
Thank you for starting that up. In your face, hashtag be damned, frankly. Because that's how you get attention, I think. It's not the time for tiptoeing around, or at least it doesn't feel like it to us.
Yep.
So what was it just the leak that made you want to start doing this?
So the leak was what pushed me really to kind of use my platform as a ex-trans teacher, somebody who taught in schools, as a non-binary and trans individual. I've been using my platform for a long time to educate and to share resources and to be an activist. But when I saw the leaked guidance, it hit something just so personal in me, as somebody who was a closeted trans young person who had no representation, and then as somebody who was the go-to teacher at school for a lot of trans pupils, and as someone who wrote an entire master's dissertation on trans inclusion within sex education and the fact the government have avoided trans children when it comes to the curriculum for many, many years, this leaked guidance just did something to me. And it made me so appalled to the point that I had to react. And nobody else was talking about it in a way that I wanted to talk about it. Everybody was saying, oh, this is, it's bad what they're suggesting. But nobody was saying that this will result in our youth not making it to adulthood. And I think once I started saying that and other people started to understand that, the reality of the weight of this guidance hit people more. Just kind of to give a summary of the guidance, some of the points that were included was that teachers were to be forced to tell parents to out their child if they're questioning their gender, even if the child objects, which is in the guidance, which is just disgusting. As somebody who works in sex education as well, I am very used to having conversations with young individuals, and they are terrified of telling their parents some things. And there's a reason why young people may be scared to tell their parents certain things. And as a safeguarding protocol, if you can see that within a child, then you know something deeper is happening. And as someone who's trained in safeguarding as well, I understand how dangerous this guidance is. The guidance also suggests that a teacher or a school should only use the child's chosen name or pronouns if the parent has given consent, placing the parent's right over the child's right. Teachers are forced not to recognise a transition within the school unless that parent has agreed to it. So even if the child says, I'm going to rebel against my parents and I'm going to be who I want to be, teachers don't have to accept that unless the parents do. One of the points that really got to me as somebody who had quite a few battles with the head teacher that they were working with at the school that they were working with is that the head teacher must also consider the mental effects on other children of allowing trans kids to exist, which again is putting other people's rights and comfort over trans individuals and trans youth. And then other ones include things like sport, dress code, hairstyle, stuff like that, which again, from my experience of working in a school, I know so many students who wore different uniform. I know so many students who used maybe a nickname rather than their full name, but apparently when it's a trans student, it's an issue. And because of my experience working in school as a trans teacher, I think that's what really fueled this movement. And now I'm working with young trans individuals. I'm working with parents who have sadly lost their trans youth because of anti-trans rhetoric and because of bullying and because of harassment. I'm working with them to hopefully hold the government accountable. And when the guidance is released, if we're not happy with it, I want to make sure that we make noise about it. And I'm preparing for that when it happens, which most likely won't be until next year now, or until after the sex education review, which is taking priority at the moment, which is due later this year as well.
It just sounds like they're leaving a lot of different ways for somebody to block it by saying, oh, well, the head teacher has to agree, and the parents, and this, and that, and only if someone's fulfilled all of those criteria. And it sounds like by putting in that part about the mental effects on the other students, because the other students are going to know that, I feel. And, you know, what do other students do to kids who are different? It's usually not anything nice, I feel. So I was pretty sickened by the guidance myself, to be perfectly honest, which is why we are here talking about this. This is perhaps quite an obvious question, but how important do you think this is for the trans community to engage with?
I think within the trans community, we are neglecting our trans youth voices. And coming from the community, there is a lot of infighting right now. There's a lot of arguments between one another, whether you're trans, non-binary, whether you're in the LGB community. There is a lot of infighting. And I think at the end of the day, when they come for one of us, and I think this is something that many people feel in the community, when they come for one of us, they will then come for another person in the community and then another until we're all gone. And at the moment, they are targeting trans people, but specifically trans youth, because they don't see trans youth as anything other than their parents' object. And once they're able to attack trans youth and they're able to say, well, trans kids can't transition, they can't access medical care, they can't go by their chosen name and their chosen pronoun, we can do the same for trans adults. And then it becomes, what about queer people? What about bisexual people? What about the rights of those people? And unfortunately, I don't think enough of the wider community understand this, that once they succeed in attacking and, silencing one community and one group, they will just keep going. And we've seen this before. And it really makes me feel sad because as a non-binary person, some trans people don't accept me. Some queer people don't accept me. And I know how it feels to be left out of your own community. And I know for a fact how young people feel being left out of their own community, how young trans people feel, because there are conversations happening online from trans adults who say that trans youth shouldn't be transitioning. And there's just a lot of, disruption within the community. There's a lot of infighting. And as I said, I think we need to realise that once one part of our community is attacked, the rest will follow. And we have to stand for our youth, because otherwise our youth won't make it into adulthood. And then there's a reason for trans adults to be attacked because there's less of us. And our trans youth need us to protect them, need us to be vocal for them, because they can't, because they're young, because they're seen as property, because they're seen as immature, because they don't have adult rights. We need to be the voice of that. And as somebody who's worked with trans youth, who has seen the fear that somebody has when talking about how their parents would react, the fear of what's going on around the world, but also the light in their eyes when they see a trans individual, myself, navigating the world and living an everyday life, I understand how vital it is that we give our trans youth a voice and a platform, and we are there for them, because unfortunately their voices aren't heard until, sadly, they're no longer with us.
That's the refrain every time down, all the way through history. Think of the children! Yep. And the kind of using that as a wedge issue by saying, oh, they're a danger to children, the transes might be coming for your children, as it was in the 80s with the gay community, and on throughout the history of civil rights. It's always been these people are going to have an impact on your children. And yeah, as you say, that once there's fewer of us, it's that poem, it's that sodding poem, isn't it? The first they came for but we're like 4 lines in now, and no one's still doing anything about it. So, final question, how can our audience get involved?
One of the things that I am really passionate about when it comes to this campaign is putting our trans youth voices at the centre, because they are the reason we're doing this. And as a trans adult who came out later in life, I have different experiences to a young trans person today. And obviously I want to safeguard them. I don't want to put their face out there. But if there are young trans people who can safely share their story or anonymously share their story, I would love to hear them. If there are trans adults who are younger, who have come out maybe a few years ago when they were in their teens, maybe they can share their stories, because I'm nearly 25 now. My experience is slightly different. I want people who were trans kids to share their stories, parents who have trans kids to share their stories, and not just stories of losing their children, because yes, it happened, and those stories are so vital, as we've seen recently by the fact that we lost our sibling Corey. And speaking with Corey's mum, who now shares his story, she is so vocal about making sure that his legacy lives on. But I do also think it's vital that we share positive stories of trans kids and trans parents, that they can survive, that they can grow up, that they can be happy, that they can be supported. I also think it's vital that teachers speak out, and teachers who are teaching in school right now to speak out about how they are active allies, how they challenge transphobia in the school, how they have actively fought for inclusion within sex education or within language in the classroom, if they've shared their pronouns with the class. Little things like that are ways that you can support the campaign, but also things like sharing the hashtag. And for me, one of the things that I've been doing quite a lot is educating my audience on what's actually happening legally, what people are saying, what the NHS has said, what the Equality and Human Rights Commission has said, because those are things that people may not be keeping an eye on, but that rhetoric is very important to understand how we go from A to B. So I've also been creating resources on that. So sharing resources on that is very important. But also, just a general tip, just checking on your trans friends and family members, and just be supportive of them. And don't just checking on them because they're going through a hard time right now. Checking on them because you want to checking on them, and you want to make sure that they're okay, because it's dire out here for trans people, and it's so important that we are checking in with each other, that we are creating a space that we can exist together, where we can share the difficulties that we're going through, but also can have some joy in that space as well. And obviously, when the guidance does become a reality, or when the guidance does come out, whether or not it does do the things that it said it would do in the leak, or if it, amazingly is the best guidance ever and does support trans kids, I will be doing a follow-up, whether that is some sort of demonstration, whether that's more education, whether that's calling to MPs. There will be things that will be continuously happening until our trans kids are given their rights in schools. There feels like there's so much that you can do about the campaign. Another thing is like emailing your MP if you feel able to, messaging them, calling them out on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. I know it sounds really like Gen Z. However, calling out your MP online can be very beneficial, because it gives it a public platform where they can't deny it. They can't just send the email to their secretary. They have to comment. They have to be public about it. And then in regards to our late Corey, I've worked closely with his mum to create a badge in his honour to share his final words, and all of the funds for that are going to Great Ormond Street Child's Hospital. So that is also available via my social media as well, because I'm very keen on also supporting trans kids within their journey, but also honouring the trans kids that we've lost, because it feels like we talk about individuals that we have lost this year for a little bit of time, and then another child is lost, and it just keeps adding up and adding up and adding up, and we need to keep their names in our vocabulary, and we need to make sure that we are fighting for them, and also fighting for the kids that are still here as well. So there's a lot of things you can do, a variety of things where you can help people, and also just be kind to each other as well,
and yourselves.
and yourselves. Yeah,
be kind to yourself. We don't all have to be firing on all cylinders all the time. Having a rest is important.
Throughout the last 2 weeks, something that I've been very, very vocal about is that you can't comment on every single issue that's happening in the world, particularly if you're a trans person right now. As a trans journalist, I'm having to do this for my work. I'm having to do this for my other job. I'm having to comment on this for my campaign. And it takes a lot out of you, particularly if you're also neurodivergent, but also if, what you are seeing online is just in your face anti-trans, reposts. It's not anything that's adding to the conversation. Maybe they're not infographics that add anything to the conversation. Maybe they're just the same newspaper headline or TikTok that keeps resurfacing of something that's anti-trans. And I think it's very important that we are kind to ourselves and understand that we can't be vocal to every issue. That doesn't mean that you're not an activist. That doesn't mean you're not, behind the fight. It just means that you're looking after yourself, because we're people too. And as trans people, we shouldn't have to be the only ones being vocal people all the time. We shouldn't have to comment on every single issue or situation, because if we did, we wouldn't have time to do anything else and we would just be burnt out. So if you are an ally, my call to you is that if you are seeing, your trans friends being very vocal, check in with them, but also be vocal yourself and understand that your voice, unfortunately, can be the most important in the room, which I hate to say, but it is. And it can be the loudest, and we need you to be the loudest because I need a break.
Yeah, you and me both. Just lastly then, where can people find you online?
So my Instagram is Sex Theory with D. I will spell it out. It is STheoryWhitedee, because Instagram hates any kind of conversation around sex. So I have to censor myself. You can also find me on TikTok at the same handle. I also do workshops and inclusion workshops and just kind of anything to do with gender identity, being trans, sex education via my LinkedIn, which is just D Whitnell. And yeah, that's kind of anything. I'm also writing a book on sex education, primarily for trans individuals and trans youth, which will talk about things like binding and how your medication may impact puberty, how you can have sex as a trans individual, and that will be out next year as well. So lots going on, as you can tell, as a creative. There's so much.
Always a lot of plates spinning.
Yeah.
Well, Dee, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, what did you think of that?
Oh, it was a great interview. Dee was great. They had such great energy and enthusiasm, and it'd be great to work with them in the future.
Yeah.
I think we can.
I'm sure we can arrange that, but I did love how all of the answers were just spot on, really. I would ask the question and they would just immediately have a good answer, and particularly about how people can get involved, because that's why I asked that question. Dear listener, you're looking very good today, may I say.
Yes, we can watch your every move.
So I would recommend. I've followed Dee for a good while now on Instagram, and then we set this interview up and I realised it was the same person. I was like, oh wow, that's cool. So yes, would recommend. Do check out the social media presence.
But yeah, they did a really good job on that one. But now, as of October 31st, we are told that this long-awaited guidance for trans kids will be released before Christmas. The Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, said, "We will get it out before Christmas, and then we'll have a long consultation, because I don't want teachers to spend their Christmas worrying about it as much as I've spent most of the year worried about it. Although I suspect that we're worried about completely different things." She also said it's a very tricky area. It is difficult. It is a consultation, because we're sure there will be lots of opinions around this as well, which to me sounds like they're expecting some pushback and are looking to try and invalidate certain options before the guidance even comes out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that could be said about this, and we'll try and cover some of it, but there's just quite a lot of quotes from different teachers that have come out in the wake of this, some of which have been, given anonymously. One of the ones that we saw is, "There are so many vulnerable children in education who need so much support, so much help, and this isn't something that is frankly needed in the education system at all. As a teacher, my number one priority is safeguarding, and I really can't understand how this has anything to do with safeguarding students. It seems to just be safeguarding Tory interests." Which... yeah, really.
Safeguarding transphobia is those interests, essentially, isn't it? That is some pretty damning stuff from that teacher.
Yeah.
You said you had multiple.
Another teacher, again anonymous, works in London. "Teachers and schools do not have all the information about all of the children's home environments, and instead of supporting a pupil to be themselves at school, we could be putting them at risk of harm. It's dangerous behaviour. It's not solving a problem. It is creating a problem." So, again, that's a tactic we've seen many times from this government, and others like it, really, which is make up a problem and demonise whoever you think or whoever you have decided is causing that problem, and spend all of your time railing against that rather than doing anything meaningful in terms of, legislation or help people in your country get through the day, and be able to put the heating on and eat food, for example.
Oh, exactly. And just make the lives of the most vulnerable minority, the young part of the most vulnerable minority, who's even more vulnerable than the vulnerable section that's already vulnerable already, whose already life is hell, even more of a hell, and make them more worry about the people who they would find as their more trusted guardians to be someone that they can no longer trust.
Yeah.
Teachers are in a place of being the guardians for the kids, and it's just, when it comes to my school life, we were just in that weird middle ground in 2016 where it was just before they started putting in the LGBT, just after section 28, but just before all the guidance and such. And even then, the bullying towards some trans students was quite insane of itself. And
I can imagine.
And the environment around some kids, I think I've had one friend who just couldn't come out to their parents because there was already mentions of when their parents mentioned something out of the blue, just saying, we'll get you sorted, we'll make sure you're, what was the exact wording? It was, we'll get it sorted if you come out as gay, we'll make sure to get you, but it was basically alluding to putting them through conversion therapy.
Right. That's not really getting it sorted, is it?
No, exactly. It's it's sort of the most vulnerable time where people who you are supposed to trust can put you into the most harm, and you're opening them up to the lions.
Yeah, basically, and you don't know what someone's home life is like unless you sit down and have that conversation. And so for teachers to be essentially forced to do that, they have to say, if the child uses a particular combination of words that involves the word transgender, you have to then report that back to the parents. That is just a safeguarding issue, right? There's no other way of saying it. That is obviously a really, really stupid idea. And I mean, again, it's the cruelty is the point, isn't it? They want to make it as difficult as possible to exist and be trans.
Basically, yeah, and force kids into closet, and then eventually, well, they start with as Dee said, they start with the trans kids, and then they'll move on to the adults. We've seen it in America as well.
Yep.
Like, Don't Say Gay Bill then caused massive movements to all over the country. Gosh, we need to do a coverage of America again. But yeah, it's sort of like then led to a tidal wave of, okay, we've demonising one part of a minority, then allows us to demonise a minority, which then leads to a giant, just tidal wave of hate. And quite frankly, if the government does this, it'll just be the start. And quite frankly, with this guidance, I'm still trying to hope that they might exclude the bit where you out trans kids to parents. But given its origins and how, when it was initially announced, it was essentially Nadim Zahawi, who was I can't remember what his position was in government, but he said that that was the intention of this guidance. It was from the start meant to out trans kids. And he was putting the EHRC in charge, which, as we already seen earlier on in this pod, it's an absolute horror show, and they're leading it.
Well, so the woman who's made the announcement, Gillian Keegan, she has previously, that guidance that was leaked, she's backed it. So she has already expressed support for the position where teachers should out trans kids to their parents.
Ah, Jesus.
So we don't know for sure that that's going to be in it. Hopefully the stink that was raised about it, internally and externally, will have caused them to think, oh, well, maybe this isn't such a good idea. But we don't know that, and we won't know that until the guidance actually drops, which we are told will be before Christmas, which is a little less than 2 months away now as we record this.
Not to interrupt, but I remember the announcement being announced, and then, like last year in Warwick Uni, some trans activists hounded Nadim Zahawi out of Warwick University, and that was a sight to be seen. I chatted with the protesters for that. That was great. They were really cool. But yeah, as you said, it's coming out in December, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it says before Christmas, so theoretically that might even be late November, but it could be tomorrow as far as we're aware, but at some point before Christmas, which allows them to be, nice and non-specific about it. I wonder if perhaps it's not ready, or maybe they want to put it out directly before Christmas in an attempt to kind of bury it in a way. Because of the document that it is, it will have to be consulted on. So there will be a consultation which will be open to teachers and head teachers and presumably other stakeholders. So even if it does come out and says, yes, this is what we're going to do, there is still time, comrade. We can push back against it more so than we already have. So we'll see when the guidance actually drops properly, rather than just an announcement of an announcement.
Oh, exactly. And for us as a trans community and us as What the Transes will be making a response to
Yes.
it as well.
Yes, I mean, again, it's one of the things that kind of feels like we have to do, which really sucks, because the last one of those that we felt like we had to do was no fun at all. The NHS consultation that we did a mini episode about.
Also, I think we should probably mention, for all those who have filled it in, thank you for filling that in.
Yes.
It's been great to see all the responses and heartwarming to see everyone share out the stuff, everyone saying, oh look, we've all done a great job, and it's all very good that we're patting ourselves on the back. But thank you so much for putting your stories, letting them know exactly how you feel. Hundreds of people put some stuff in, maybe even more than that we didn't even see. And you've all done a fantastic job, and hopefully they will have to listen to us.
Simply saying that there is time to respond to this. We don't have to just sort of go along with it, and we shouldn't, and we won't, because there will be people responding, and even if the people responding are not themselves trans, hopefully, I suspect there's going to be quite a lot of teachers who are very, very concerned about what this means for safeguarding, and those people will be responding as well, even if the wider community isn't really able to, because it's got a narrow range of, defined stakeholders who can actually respond to it. Perhaps. We shall see. But on that subject, I think that's as good as place as any to leave it. I think we're trying to leave it on a call to action, if not a positive, because it's quite difficult to find a positive. If you like the show and you've not already signed up, please do get in touch with us on the social media. We have our own fancy websites, which is whatthetrans.com. Obviously, we're on Twitter or X, perhaps, at whatthetrans, Facebook, whatthetrans, Patreon, if you would like to support us, and I guess Threads at whatthetrans. We're there as well. And thank you very much for tuning in, and we hope you will do so again. And look after yourselves, and please do look after yourselves.
Yes.
All right.
Bye.
Goodbye. This episode of What the Trans was written and produced by Ashley Talbot and Alex Bedwell, and is edited by Ben Swithin. And we would especially like to thank our producer-level Patreons, who are Matty B,
Setcab,
Jane,
Roberto De Prunk,
Rose Absolute,
Sarah,
Catherine Halkett,
Zena,
Kiki T,
Derek,
Sky Killane,
Eric Widman,
B,
Jude,
Monsieur Squirrel,
Fergus Evans,
Anubis Ajackal,
Kamina,
Brandon Craig,
Jenny,
Break the System,
Sean Phillips,
Heidi Reardon,
Ezra,
Sophia the Sixth,
Lentil,
Philippa Tatbrook,
Alifa Aurora,
Sadie Chagall,
Clara Volumi,
Amelia,
twitch.tv/kspacegaming,
Tabitha Joe Cox, aka Candir,
Zeph,
Fiona McDonald,
Trikuso H,
Murgatroyd,
Ontologically Unjust,
Stella,
Syndagosa,
Rebecca Prentice,
Crazy Richard,
Dan Oblivion,
Florence Stanley,
Helen _
Chrissy Jarvis,
Ellie Hollingsworth now wants to learn Magic the Gathering after listening to Spewpon,
Nick Ross,
Alice Chalkley,
Melody Nix,
Fiona Punchard,
John,
Lynn Mackay,
Nick Duffy,
CB Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Ted Delphus,
Wen Riverup,
Vic Parsons,
Tila Wild,
Rowan Littlejohns,
Desiree Markland,
Patreon user,
Vic Kelly,
Catherine,
Sabrina McVeigh,
Cassius Adair,
Melissa Brooks,
Ian Coomber,
Kraken 12,
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Pena,
Lauren Onions,
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean,
Lenos,
and Chris Hubley. Thank you to you all.